Crown rot tolerance in new wheat varieties. Is there enough to base varietal decision on? Yes, there is. Take-home messages. Well, to follow on from Phil Davies, the pre-breeder's done a good job in getting some lines to a point where the commercial companies go and pick them up. From there, it's a commercial world, so people and these companies have to perform. They're paid on performance, so they need to pick it right. And the good news is that some of the recent releases have shown improvements in the presence of crown rot over and above Gregory. SunGuard 17%, SunTop 16%, Lancer 15%, and Spitfire 12%. So, quick message out of that is growers should consider alternatives to Gregory unless they know that their paddock is confirmed as a low crown rot risk. Today, by the way, is not a beat up on Gregory. It is an excellent variety and still remains so. And in the absence of crown rot, it is as good or better and has a whole heap of admirable traits that you should still pursue and grow that variety. So it's most definitely not a beat up on Gregory here. Crown rot tolerance, whilst important, should not necessarily be the most critical factor to choose a variety, nor should it be the first line of defence. And growers and advisors, based on what we're identifying here, should go and determine the level of their crown rot in their paddocks, crown rot risk in their paddocks, so they can choose the optimal variety. Crown rot takes $100 million out of the industry every year. But there was meant to be a little thing that comes down there. However, it's not necessarily the number one criteria for choosing a variety. And this is arguable selection. I just made it up pretty much myself in going through a selection list. Stem rust resistance seems to be is the king of all, and Sydney Uni have done a great job, and the companies have done a great job over years in triple stacking stem rust resistance so that we don't see it. It often falls off our radar because they've done such a good job. But if you've seen stem rust, and I was talking to Ray Hare the other day, anyone who's seen stem rust seriously, they just never forget it. So it's probably still the number one criteria. Yield, of course. Quality seems to have a factor, still seems to be a factor of success if you're going to get a variety that's really going to make it prime. It wants to be prime hard. Root lesion, nematode, resistance and tolerance, I would argue, is still more important than the resistance and tolerance in crown rot. Protein performance, possibly, that's arguable between those two. Then you've got a whole heap of other factors down here, whilst important, probably crown rot resistance and tolerance as a choosing mechanism are more important. We've gone through a lot of this stuff. I won't. We've pretty much covered it. But the crown rot tolerance trials, started in 2004 with New South Wales DPI. Steve has obviously been an integral part of it, and there's a fair bit of ongoing data that's been presented. A summary of those results. So from 2012 to 2014, being 3 dry winters, have been good opportunities to pick up some good data for crown rot tolerance. These are the crown rot resistance ratings here. So often they are linked, but it's not always. I mean, that's one thing with tolerance, is that it reflects the inherent yieldability of the variety. So compared to Gregory being at 100%, we can see that Belleroy has suffered. I mean, interestingly, Belleroy even struggles in the absence of crown rot to be at the yield levels of Gregory. Notice here, in general, these are somewhere in around 100%. So Gregory, as I was saying, in the absence of crown rot, Gregory is right up there with as good a variety as there is in the market. And it's a prime hard. It's got flexible planting windows, stands well. All sorts of other. It's quite good tolerance, good for nematodes, all sorts of good features. When you start to introduce crown rot to it, here are the varieties that start to outperform it. Here's the 17%, 12% with Spitfire, 15% with Lancer, 16% with SunTop. So Sunco's interesting. It's been around for a while. No crown rot. Gregory will outperform it, and I expected that may have even been higher. here with crown rot, whilst it's a better rating, so it's actually as an MS compared to an S, they're about the same yield in this instance. So I suppose what these tolerance trials do was to let us differentiate a bit more within the resistance ratings. Resistance ratings are so critical because they're what drives the disease in the system, but this just gives us a bit of actual yield information. So here's a bit of the background data. These 2 years were the CAS trials. 2014, thank you to Steve, we used the DPI data out of Tamworth and Gurrah. So just quickly looking at these, SunGuard. So this is in the absence of crown rot. There was one site with a bit of crown rot here. So generally, Gregory is somewhere about, is out yielding it apart from one site there at Rowena. Mitch has been a variety that's been performing pretty strongly and quite consistently. So it's in all of those sites there, it's been equivalent to or exceeded Gregory. Belleroy, the converse, really at no stage did it yield anywhere up near what Gregory can. This is in the absence of crown rot. As soon as you start to add crown rot to the system, then a number of these varieties, a number of these new lines being released are outperforming Gregory. So again, if we have a look at Mitch, every line there is sort of between 2 and up to 27% above in yield. Suntop, similarly, 102, 105, 122, 106, so, all significant, or considerable yield advantages. So we're saying that these varieties will outperform varieties such as these new varieties will outperform Gregory in the presence of crown rot. What we've got to do is establish in each of our paddocks what is that crown rot risk. And there are a number of factors that we can use and we can measure. These things are tape measures. They look like little snails, but they're actually tape measures of what we can measure to come up with a risk rating. Inoculums is the first and obvious one of which we can measure. So predictor B, and Steve will be talking about this in a minute as well. Predictor B is the protocols have been manipulated and developed such that it can give you a reliable reading on crown rot. Also does nematodes and a number of other pathogens. Also a stubble test. So if you wanted a stubble, you take stubble samples and you wanted to get a stubble for a stubble-borne disease, and I call it the Goldilocks test. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. You usually get a number that's just right. So if your sampling protocols are right, it will give you a reliable result and an objective result, as well as through the plating through Steve down at DPI in Tamworth. So once you know the inoculum level, you also really need to take into account the volume of stubble, how much you've got there. I mean, is it 3-year-old stubble that's broken down, there's not a lot there, or is it a big paddock of barley that is 5, 4, 3, come off a 5 tonne per hectare crop, and you've still got 2.5 tonnes per hectare of stubble there. You might have a low incidence, but you've got such a bulk of material, you've got to take that into account. Nematodes is an interaction, we've heard about that before, interaction with crown rot and nematodes, so you need to, and you can measure that, so you need to take it into account. Know the starting soil water, know the soil nitrate, they're two big factors on the drivers of the creation of biomass and the evaporative demand later on. Other factors that determine the soil hydraulic conductivity: clay percentage, bulk density, sedicity, EC. You can measure all of that. Time of sowing and temperatures during grain fill and in-crop rain, they're obviously factors you've got no control on. You can't well, you can with time of sowing, but these here are, you know, I suppose with in-crop rain, I mean, if it turns up at the right time, it trumps all of these, absolutely. But it still doesn't change your decision-making process at planting time as to determining the risk. So that crown rot risk, if you've determined through all those different factors that you're low, that you see, or very low, then everything's on the table, everything's available, including durum. If you determine that it's a low crown rot risk for that paddock, the varieties such as Gregory and the more intolerant varieties are available. You can grow them. You've determined the risk and you're happy to plant them. Once you start to get to moderate or high levels, and incidentally, in the district, a little bit like nematodes, there's about 35 to 40% of all paddocks that have been tested come up as a moderate or a high. So there's probably 35 to 40% of paddocks that we should be preferring these varieties to over and above Gregory. In this instance here, definitely not durum. Durum's a sucker and will get smashed. And here, if it's high, maybe you should consider something other than wheats. You know, even these, the more tolerant lines do suffer in these circumstances, or have the potential to suffer in these circumstances. And just please don't put durum in here. It'll head for a train wreck. So in summary, I suppose a full appreciation of crown rot is more than just measuring the inoculum. Take into account other soil factors. You know yourself as growers or advisors, there'll be, you know, country that's on a red soil, it's a bit tight and a bit hard, and it might run out of water a little bit quicker. It's where crown rot often shows up earlier. So understand your soils, understand all the other factors over and above just the inoculum. Consider the alternatives to Gregory unless you know the paddock's a low crown rot risk. And again, I indicate or implore at the end here, saying varietal selection is not the sole solution to crown rot. Even the best varieties can suffer big losses in the wrong paddocks. So these new ones we're talking about, yes, they're good, but they're not foolproof. You know, they're not fail-safe. Thank you. The acknowledgements. Also with Crown Analytical, we have commercial partners in helping us, so it's AGT and Longreach and SeedNet. So thank them for their financial support, and GRDC. Thank you.